Apologies for those of you who did not hear me on Zoom. All I missed was that overextended welcoming. Welcome to our new members of the Archaeological Society. We actually even had some signing up today. So this number is already out of date. Just know that, the semester started and we've been fielding a lot of emails from people who want to volunteer, particularly college students. And I just want to remind folks out there that we do have a discounted rate for students to join our society, and we also offer scholarships to various programs, including field schools. Welcome to our thank you to our donors as well. This is not a bad format. Thank you. Here we go. Okay, so we do have a lot of announcements because of the build up to Texas Archaeology Month, or months, if you will. Coming up at the end of the month, the Fort Worth Westerners group is hosting somebody you guys might be familiar with, who just published a new volume on Texas arrow points, specific to arrow points. William Moore, he will be presenting on that. So you can go to their website and request a Zoom link, much like you do with our programs, and also you can sign up to be a member. The 23rd, if you want to get involved with Dana Ritchie's monthly excavations at the Joe Reed site, there's still an opportunity. So some of you might have just gotten a taste of field school this year, and it just wasn't enough. It could be a week, it could be 5 weeks, but you don't want it to end. And if you can stand the heat, I absolutely recommend doing this. Even if it's your first time, no experience necessary. And then following that shortly after is the SMU Lab Days, where you can participate in laboratory exercises if field work might not be your cup of tea this month for various reasons. Frankly, it's not going to be, let's be honest. So if you want to get some experience with real artifacts and helping rehabilitate some very important things from previous field schools, absolutely get involved in that, Brian. Following month, we have pinch pot kit making session. These pinch pot kits are a very common introductory tool, learning tool for archaeological outreach purposes that just reaches very young people, very young audience. We receive these materials from the Texas Historical Commission. We tend to distribute them at Texas Archaeological Month events. Honestly, I just like to go and kind of chit chat, catch up with everybody. It's very easy and relaxing. Molly will be hosting that per usual twice in September at the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge, Mouthful. Then we will also have our speaker next month, Ken Lawrence, who will be presenting on a geoarchaeological topic. He is coming to speak with us for the first time, so much excited. October, tip of the iceberg with the Texas Archaeological Month activities. Just so you guys know, because our meeting is the day before the typical TAS conference, the committee decided to move it just one day earlier. So we will not, in October, just October, we will not have a Thursday meeting. It will be a Wednesday meeting, shifting it one day. So just keep that in your mind. I'll keep reminding you guys, but it'll be the same time, same room, same Zoom, etc. So just one little adjustment. The Texas Archaeological Conference, what I just referred to, so very close to our monthly, is now open for registration. Reminder, students, we have scholarships so that you can attend, especially if you've never been to an academic conference. It's a really good experience to, number one, network, and number two, get enlightened, learn some new topics, especially Texas-centric topics. So we will offer scholarships to that. It's never too late to apply. And then later in the month, those TAM events start picking up here in the North Texas region, starting with Grand Prairie. Charlene will be kind of coordinating some of that for you guys. So these are just very casual, public-facing atmospheres where we gain new members, but also just instruct people about certain or very simple topics related to archaeology. It's just a good opportunity for outreach. So again, I really encourage you guys to get involved in that. Following that is the National Cow Trails Conference in Cleveland. That is also in tandem with Fort Worth Westerners Club. And then, like I said, some of those TAM events are gonna flow into November. So there's one in Denton, November 1st, and then there's gonna be one in Plano, November 15th. So I'll put that up in the next set of announcements. I didn't want to get too far ahead, but TAM is sailing into November, guys. So Denton's also a very big one. I was one of the founders, and it's just taken off after the last 3 years. Okay, so looking just a year ahead, the next Texas conference next year will be in our area. I am the chair of the LAC, and I'm just looking to fulfill a handful of the positions. I've got some people helping me now. We've got budgets figured out. We've got location, caterer, all that figured out. So really, it's just the meat of it. Okay, so the hard stuff is over, she says jokingly. But yes, there are some roles. We had a few people interested. I just haven't organized a meeting yet. But if you want to help out, get involved. A lot of you have done this before, which is really wonderful. So just putting that out there. You can contact me. Okay, and let me at least introduce our speaker today, Chris Ringstaff, which a lot of you met at the latest TAS Academy. Particularly regarding pretty common topic, we like to talk about lithics. And Chris is also intersecting his discussion with something very near and dear to me, geography. I think a lot of people are very interested in using spatial analysis for answering archaeological problems because the way people interact with landscapes is a very common problem or context. So without further ado, Chris Ringstaff, come on up to the stage, please.
Okay. Testing. Is that working?
No.
No.
Working probably on Zoom.
Well, if it's working on Zoom, I can talk loud enough, so you all. So, thank you all so much for having me out. I'll try to make this as interesting as possible. And this is interesting stuff. I quit a perfectly good job to pursue this search, so we'll see if I made the right decision. But my topic for the evening and as far as I guess that the drop down shouldn't all too much on.
No.
Oh, that's okay. So I'm going to be discussing 3 different sites at the Buttermilk Creek, and most of y'all, or probably all of y'all will know, that is the area where the very well-known Gault and Friedkin sites are located. So this talk, basically, I do hold a master's degree in geography, so those skills ended up transferring very well into helping me to archaeological analysis. And so to Alex's point, we'll see how this goes. So let me just jump right in. Fortunately for you all, and so it won't be a snoozer, I never read any of these presentations. I just throw some slides on there and let it take me where. So let's, all right, so for those of you who do not know where Buttermilk Creek is, basically, if you just drive down I-35 and you get to Salado, past Temple, hang a right, and shoot west. Anyway, and it's right there, as you can see, it's right on the county line. So that is the Buttermilk Creek Ranch. Buttermilk Creek Ranch is owned by the Kalpakis family. I know well, and there are wonderful people who are letting me do my dissertation research. All right, so there's a close-up so you can see the topography a little bit better. And so to the far right, you can see this is just the standard, USGS quadrangle, and there's Buttermilk Creek. And so essentially, the Buttermilk Creek is at the headwaters, is the spring headwaters of the Buttermilk Creek is within the ranch. And it's really quite something. They're pumping now because got quite a bit of rain. And so now draping the aerial imagery on top of the topography. And so basically I just made the topography a little bit more translucent. You look at all the development that's going on out there. The ranch is completely surrounded by these limestone mines. And this is, as you well know, the Austin area is just booming, Williamson County. And so development is encroaching on a lot of these properties, a lot of these old ranches that have archaeological resources on them. And fortunately, not on the Buttermilk Creek Ranch. So we were fortunate there. So here you can see where the ranch is not just the development, but other archaeological sites that are in the area. You have Gault, you have that was excavated by Michael Collins. You have Debrah L. Friedkin that was excavated by Michael Waters, and then other sites that were recorded in the 80s and I think 90s. And so basically, honestly, the whole place is really one big archaeological site, and trying to delineate one site from the other is a chore in itself. All right, so looking at the geology, the geology is very significant in this area, and I'll explain why. So as you can see, we have a large percentage of the property, probably 80% of the property is Edwards Formation. And Edwards Formation is known for the cherts that occur in it, which is a major resource for hunter-gatherers in prehistoric times. Now to the southwest, you can see there's the Georgetown Formation that shows up as KGT, and it's non-chert bearing. And then at the base, there is also KC, that's the Comanche Peak Formation. It's an impermeable layer, so when all that water percolates through the Edwards Swiss cheese rock, hits that impermeable, you get springs. And that's why the springheads are at the pocket property. They're all both springs within Gault and downstream. All right, so there's the larger Edwards resource area. This is a map that Charles Frederick and I produced way back, longer ago than I care to admit. And you can see the little red square, the little strip of Edwards that shoots up the Balcones Escarpment. That's where I'm currently working, that area along there. So within that narrow strip of Edwards limestone on the Balcones Escarpment, Williamson County and just into Bell County and into Travis County is what I would call the Georgetown resource area. Georgetown chert, it's not well defined, but it's well known. And it is probably some of the finest chert that's in the world. It's some of the best, and it was a major resource for prehistoric hunter-gatherers. And I think it is no less significant than, let's say, Alabates, except there's just not a national monument there. It's just a lot of houses and development. And so, so as part of my research, I'll be defining the Edwards resource area, but we'll be talking about other things for this talk. But just think Williamson County, Georgetown chert, and it's that strip of Edwards that goes through Georgetown along the escarpment. So so when we look at the Buttermilk Creek Ranch, the geologic formations that are highlighted in red like I said, we have the overlying Georgetown Formation, underlying Comanche Peak. And then the Edwards Formation that's there is actually fairly thin. You know, if you go down to places like Curve, the Edwards Group, as they call it, is like 200 or 300 feet thick. And this particular location, it's probably less than 100 feet. And so, but within that, there are different members as this thing was forming during the Cretaceous. And what I'm seeing within these different members are cherts that vary in their color and texture. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on the geology. All right, so I got access to the property. I met the Kalpakis family, and you know, being the geographer that I am, well, it's all about the where. I just did a full-blown survey of the whole place. And so I took RTK GNSS, which, you know, is just fancy a GPS unit that, you know, I can pick up satellites from the European satellites, the Chinese, just global navigation satellite system. So I'm picking up a lot of satellites. And then I can correct those real time in the field and get centimeter accuracy. And so the data that I'm collecting are fairly high quality. And so that's going to help with my GIS analysis. So that's me and one of my colleagues, Jen Anderson, and we're out doing GNSS survey. All right, so right here, so here's a bunch of my data points. Now right here to the lower left, now that area is all that non-chert bearing. It's still yet to be surveyed. So, but it's largely, you know, looking at the historic aerials, it's been blitzed and there's no chert out there. That doesn't mean that there's not any sites up here on this prominent area. This is, you know, not that I'm saving dessert for last, but so first things first. So the colored polygons that you see there, these are two very large lithic procurement sites that I recorded, right? And as you can see down here, and for those of you on Zoom, I will use the mouse here. So you have the Gault site right here, and then you have these massive lithic procurement sites that completely surround the Buttermilk Creek. So, so when you look at, so looking at these things, and you think of, you know, these different lithostrata, if you will, right? And so within these layers of limestone, you get these chert beds that extend through there. Some of them are continuous. So I could follow some of these across the valley. So the Buttermilk Creek would incise and eat away a bunch of it. And I could go to the same elevation on the other side and find the same chert, the same elevation, right? But some of the beds were discontinuous. And so it's kind of weird. So I'm trying to wrap my head around in a spatial way. It's like, well, where are the good cherts? How are they occurring in these lithostrata? And how are human, you know, targeting these and learning these landscapes and going in and using these as a raw material resource? All right, so here are the red dots are actually raw material samples. The black dots are raw material observations. So based on, and it's probably, and since this time I made this, there's probably more dots, but so I built this model based on that. And just so the red or the, you know, off red or pink, that's where the high grade raw materials are. And at the highest portions of, if they're at the highest end of that Edwards formation. So they're at the highest elevation, right below the Georgetown contact. And as I go down in elevation, for whatever reason, the cherts seem to get, if you will, crack. The orange layer It's like slightly less silica, more inclusions, and then by the time I got to the bottom, by and large, except for some of the discontinuous beds, the cherts were not very good. And so let me characterize them. So the upper cherts there, as you can see, so I'll just go one at a time. These are very consistent with what has been called Georgetown chert, very high grade. They occur in just flat, ovate nodules. And one of the most interesting things is that whole upper surface was completely solution dissolved. I found none of that stuff in situ. Right. And so what has happened over the course of hundreds of thousands of years is all the carbonate rock melted away, but not the silica. Silica is not going to melt away like carbonate, right? So it just left a lag of these high quality nodules across that landscape. And so the first arrivals that got there, it was first come, first serve, and they freaked, for lack of better. I mean, this is really some of the best chert. And those nodules lend themselves very well to making large bifaces. And for any of you all who know this, they have a thing for that anyway. And then all right, so the next layer below that, so what I'm calling kind of mid-slope cherts, I did find those in situ. I was able to procure some of that actually out of the rock, and it's good stuff. I mean, it's usable. I saw that it was being utilized, but it did have, like, you can see laminations and inclusions, but it's fairly high silica. It's got a sharp edge, and it'll work in a pinch. And then once you get below that, the cherts really, they're just lower quality. They are utilizing those things, so I find a flake here or there, a core roughed out, but they're just not utilizing it in the same intensity as the high grade stuff. They're going for the good stuff. All right, so over the course of my survey, so all these little triangles there are areas that I'm defining as really high density workshops, right? So you're doing an archaeological survey and you come across an area and you find 10,000 flakes in an area, I mean, it's just, there's more flakes than dirt, it's unreal. And so these things represent different things. Some of them are palimpsests, and that's just a fancy word for archaeological deposits that have accumulated over the course, in this case, 13, 15 plus thousand years, right? They come back to the same spot, stuff gets napped, laid out, it just piles up, right? Then there are more discrete, episodes where you don't get so much background noise, right? It's a little less palimpsesty. It tends toward, more than a single time period, right? It's not as, polluted, if you will. And so anyway, so you get a potpourri of these different kinds of archaeological features. Well, what do you know? Anywhere these occur, it's where the good material is. These workshops, these palimpsests. And so, yeah, they're targeting that raw material specifically. Okay, and then there's the position of Gault and Friedkin in proximity. So, they're right there. All right, so me, now you have to understand that those quarries are being used throughout time. But, I'm someone that I like dessert first. And so, and the older the better. And so one of the most diagnostic early Paleo-Indian technologies is certainly glass. You have prismatic blades, you have, fluted bifaces, overshot flaking, slot bifaces. It's very diagnostic. And so these are the kinds of things that you can pick up technologically, especially early on. So going back to some of the work, and this is from Bill Dickens, from Texas A&M, the late Bill Dickens, bless, sorry, he's a good man. This was his dissertation where he characterized some of the early stage technology. He did the whole range, but you know, here I'm just characterizing and using his work to characterize the early stage stuff. This would be kind of my expectations of what I would see up in these uplands where these raw material nodules are occurring, right? They're going out, they're testing these nodules, they're making these blanks. You know, no one's gonna haul out, you know, 200 pounds of rock in the bag. No, you're gonna go out there, you're gonna make sure the raw material is viable, you're gonna blank it all out on site. And then you're gonna card off the biface and flake blanks. And then also the preforms for your blade cores. All right. So, so using my geographic in ArcGIS, you know, or QGIS or whatever your groove is. So I did a spatial query. So, you know, with all those little dots, you know, that I recorded, they had attributes, right? And so every time I'd record something, I record it as, okay, patinated biface with indenting, patinated biface with overshots, a blade, you know, core, this, that, you know, everything had its individual code, right? So I went in and did a spatial query on anything that would indicate Clovis technology, and those attributes that are well known are blade cores, blades, overshot flakes, bifaces with overshots, bifaces with percussion in thinning, right? Fluting, if you will, and high patination. And that's the thing, the high patination. Patination, and one of my dear colleagues, Charles Frederick, did a study of patination. Patination is kind of a relative indicator of age, right? These cherts, as you know, like solar isoglass or whatever, you know, these things lay out, the surfaces change physically and chemically, they reflect light differently. So you can't really use it as like obsidian hydration. It's not really a valid, you know, dating technique. However, it is a relative indicator of age. Some of these artifacts were patinated just flat, plain white, and some of them been stepped on cows, and they were Georgetown blue, right? And the patination right on was like 3 millimeters. It's crazy. So they'd been laying out quite some time. Okay, there we go. So, hold on, did I do that right? Okay, and there, okay, so I queried that, and within those, there are quite a few clusters that I want to look at. So here's some of the different clusters that, you know, I'm going to discuss, particularly 1, 2, and 3. And these had pretty serious, you know, Clovis technological attributes. All right, so here's cluster 1. And so I went in, and you can see, now that's actually the little red cluster of dots right there. As you can see, that's pretty tight. And so when I went in and looked at some of those, lo and behold, so I'm finding, you know, overshot flakes, I'm finding blade fragments, I'm finding bifaces with blade removals, I'm finding mid-stage bifaces with overshots. Oh, this is nice. Bifaces with lateral overshots and percussion indentting. This just stinks to high heaven. You know, did I find any fluted points? You know, but if this, and 1 or 2 of these artifacts in themselves would not be very compelling as an entire collection. You know, something's of cultural activity is afoot. There's something's up with this. And so, and it gets even more interesting. This is actually fairly cool. So I'm getting these bifaces that have overshot flaking on them. And then I'm seeing the patination is removed by percussion thinning. People are coming back later and picking up these biface and then what are you thinking? You know, you're throwing this away, and then they start, it's recycled. You know, and so this is really an interesting example of, and so a lot of those features actually got pilfered by later people going in and collecting some of the materials out of them, probably because at some point that resource really started getting depleted. You know, what happened is those nodules start getting all picked over. And then, you know, by the end of it, you know, people are, you know, relegated to the dregs. Okay, and so here's another example. Here's another cluster that's actually relatively close, but it was far enough away to consider it a discrete cluster. I've got a wedge-shaped core, which comes right out of Collins's, you know, blade technology book. I've got flake cores with overshots. I've got, you know, overshot flakes. You know, so same kind of deal. So on another side, yet again, and given proximity to Gault, here's another area that's actually a fairly tight cluster. And I'm getting blade flakes, I'm getting overshots, wedge-shaped cores, the same kind of deal, all higher. So, so these were all recorded and collected. And so outside of that, those areas in those uplands, I'm finding other Clovis diagnostics. This piece to the right there, the Clovis blade core, you know, for those archaeologists, and you'll be out talking to people, talking to kids, and they'll say, well, what is the coolest thing you ever found? And then, you know, a lot of times you honestly have to think about it. You know, I'm just like, what is the coolest thing? Well, I'll tell you what, that is one of the coolest things I have ever found. And it was a Clovis, it's a Clovis. This screen, it's right out of the columns. And so that came from the uplands on one of those lithic procurement sites. And it was right on the margin of the Georgetown, one of the Georgetown lag outcrops. And now I can't be sure, but that particular raw material doesn't match any of the 100 raw material samples that I have taken from the property. I don't think that core is from there. I don't know that for a fact. Chemical analysis right now on Edward's chert is a little dubious. It's still in the works. But I think, and this thing is near depletion, I think they were carrying this core with them. They got to the area where the good raw material was, and they ditched it. It's like, why carry it? And now the biface to the right, for those of you that know Clovis technology, you know, not only do you get the more lanceolate points, but Clovis, they also made these large oval bifaces as well. And so here we have a large oval biface with 3 different overshots. You know, 1 overshot, 2, 3. You know, so you have 3 overshots on one face, and the other side just got boogered up, man. They just couldn't win on that other side, and it got ditched. Yeah, that's step stacks. I've been there a million times. I've always thought that flint knapping might have been the origin of profanity. So, all right, so let's talk about a third site. And this is, you know, so for those of you that had seen this paper at the Lithics Academy, or me give this before when I was 23, when I was in a wheelchair, you had to deal with that. Oh, my Dr. Strangelove. Okay, so since that time, I've been looking at 2 other clusters in the valley. And these are a lot different, and they're very significant. So now the real sad thing here, and you see that pond? Oh my God, and there's a dam right there where you can, to the right, when you can see kind of where the dam is, that dam. It's probably made out of some of the craziest Paleogene deposits. And so those all got scooped up in the 60s, probably about 1963. So I got into the aerial photography and I geo-referenced a bunch of it. And so in the like 1954, there was nothing, you know, it was pristine. And then in 63, the pond was there. And you could still see some of the scars were still fresh. So maybe it was a year old, maybe it was made in 62. And so, well, okay. So on the other side of the dam, those deposits are intact. So, okay, well, fair enough. And so that's 41 BL 1434. We call it the 3 owl site. A bird guy came out one evening, he called it 3 owls. It was quite something. 3 owl site, it's fitting. So all right, so the stratigraphy at the 3 owl site is also a little bit of a head scratcher, but actually it's very similar to what I would guess area 8 at the Gault site. So you see the darker horizon and then it goes light, you know, there's a very clear boundary. Well, so based on some of the column sampling that we've done and some of the diagnostic artifacts, we haven't done any chronometric work, but the diagnostics are very telling. There's a disconformity there. Basically, the whole middle Holocene and some of the early Holocene is missing. It's gone, eroded away, whatever. You know, I'll leave that to the Ken Lawrences. So basically, there's an A horizon, and there's in the very top, there's a kind of a sheet midden up there where there are arrow points and transitional archaic dart points, insert. And then below that, toward under the burn rock, like Marshall. So, you know, we're getting back, you know, kind of 3K range-ish. And then you get into that light segments. And then the next diagnostic I find is St. Mary's Hall, which is, you know, late Paleo-Indian, and then Golondrina. And then below that, we kept digging down into it. And as we went down, what we noticed was, so right below where it says early Holocene soil, carbonate filaments, all the chert was patinated white, right? It was like pure white, like the stuff I was finding in the uplands. When I got down into this lower state, and I kept finding artifacts, everything was orange. It's like, whoa, what? It's like orange chert? Well, no, it's not orange chert. It was all mineral stained from the iron and fluctuating water table. So, right, it's below the water table, it's going up, down, and it's staining all this chert. And that was a similar phenomena that you see when I went to the Texas State lab and I saw all the Gault stuff laid out, and all the stuff was orange. It's like, okay, I'm in. And so here's some of the artifacts. There's a prismatic blade, there's a secondary blade. My wife actually found that. I took her out to this site to convince her that I wasn't crazy. And she and I had worked on a Folsom site in North Dakota. And who's going to North Dakota? Oh, yes. Worked on a Folsom site. And and she found that, and I said, told you so. You know, now there's no prismatic blade technology, but she knows what prismatic blade is. And found a wedge-shaped core that's right out of Collins's blade book. Another prismatic blade. So I'm finding orange, like overshot bifaces. Oh, here's one that's in-thinned from the bottom that overshot, and then an overshot on the other face. So no fluted points, but just everything just stinks to high heaven of these early technologies. This giant flake blank was knocked off of a big bifacial core. It actually had a lipped platform. So that was really cool. I mean, it was just giant. And as you notice, it's all orange, and they're all minerals. And then, but unlike what I was seeing in the uplands, well, there's just tools. There's like lots of expedient tools. Like every little flake that I'd look at had some kind of modification to it. So I'm finding end scrapers, and so this was completely different than what I'm seeing in the uplands. Wasn't finding any tools in the uplands. They were really using that place specifically as a raw material resource. I mean, I'd find the occasional this, that. It just there wasn't much camping going up in the uplands. And I scrounged that place, you know, like a pro. Now the campsite activities were really hanging down close. And so unlike for any of you TAS members that worked on Starvin Marvin site out in Kerrville, right? And bless them. The catchment basin for that particular location, it was not subject to flashy discharge. So they could camp in those areas. And they really didn't get, you know, flash flooding like that. So I think they just hung out in those lowland areas and they really didn't have to worry about it. And so, all right, so here's a Venn diagram that I put together, and this is all, I'm just kind of patched. So a lot of this is draft and I'm patching this up. TAS, so I can go down and have some decent Mexican food and they're good surveys. But okay, so the blue oval are the two upland sites, right? And what you have is we're looking at the technological continuum, right? From acquisition to discard, right? And so where they go up and they grab the raw material, they manufacture stuff, they use it, and it gets thrown away. And so what I'm seeing up in the uplands is just most of it was all selection early and middle stage. Maybe a little late stage stuff, and maybe I'd find the occasional ditched point here or there. I mean, it's just, but it was all front. But down in the valley, I got the full range. And so they're also collecting raw material down there. Are they hauling it down? So what's going on? So it's making me think about what's going on, but it's fairly obvious. You know, the Gault folks were saying, well, it was all one-stop shopping, you know, all the cherts here. And then they show you that, and for those of you who've been to the Gault site, you know, there are those chert nodules in the limestone wall. Well, that didn't do what you wanted to do. You can pry that stuff out, and cherts laying everywhere. No one's gonna pry rock, you know, chert out of rock when it's just laying around all over the place. And so I'll get to that. So this is kind of a Venn diagram of what's going on, and you get the full scale of reduction down there from acquisition to discard at 3L. But in the uplands, it's just mining. So here is here's a digital elevation model, you know, and that's using LiDAR, right? And so those topographic contours are right. And so I'm kind of looking at the elevations here. So here you can see where all the sites fit in the valley, right? And so there are my two large lithic procurement sites. And then right here, there's that pond where, and then here's 3L. Okay, there's Gault, and then here's Debra L. Friedkin, and the drainage goes on down. So All right. So here's where the good raw material is relative to all that. So that's where all the Georgetown cherts occurring, right? But, okay, so to understand better what was going on at Gault, using that, I modeled based on elevation. Well, they do have good chert over there at Gault because they have those elevations over there. So I went out there with Sergio Ayala and we went to the up parking lot. So for those of you who've been there, it's behind the crappy house that's out there. But and so we parked and I took the GPS unit and I go, if we go 70 meters that way, we're gonna start seeing Georgetown flakes. I guarantee you. And sure enough, it's like, yes, the model is good. And so I was able to model it. So the whole it's a horseshoe of really high grade raw materials around that upper valley. And so it probably speaks to, why it was so intensively occupied, that and the water. But to give the Gault people, credit, there's a lot of secondary raw materials. You got to consider that as the Buttermilk Creek is being incised, over hundreds of thousands of years, all those beds of chert are getting moved into that valley, into alluvium and colluvium, right? And so those raw materials are there, but it's, again, it's a grab bag, it's a potpourri. It's not all good. There's a lot of crap in there. There's some good stuff. A lot of it's blocky. It's not the flat ovate nodules, And so so the approaches to the reduction of those nodules were different depending on where you were on the landscape. So I'm thinking that secondary stuff's really good for blade cores and big flake technologies and stuff like that. And raw materials and upland really good for bifaces, and then where those nodules, are busted up through weathering, different kinds of cores. So let me just kind of run through that. So, all right, so I just can't say enough about the good things about the landowners, Mark and Katie Kalvakis. They've just, they really did me a solid by letting me do all this research out there. This is taking me, basically, and while I'm working for TxDOT and building your roads, 3 years. And in that time, I recorded, the 2 really big lithic procurement sites. They're big. It's like 320 acres of lithic procurement. I mean, that's a lot. And they have like 1,000 acres. That's just all right. And then the third site that's in the alluvial valley, it's a little bit more. It's a campsite, and it's basically I can look right across. There's the fence, and Gault is right there. It's basically an extension of the Gault deposits. So the overlay that I did, and as you guys saw, so it allowed me to do the spatial delineation of, what's where are the good cherts, how are people using this landscape, and where are they having to go to get, the good raw materials. So I'm just gonna blow through this. Like I said, this is just a draft, so I'm trying to just work through this for TAS. But I think one of the thing here is, so the Georgetown resource area, and I showed you that map of the Georgetown area. This is really the northern extent of that resource area. Charles Frederick and I did all that work at Fort Hood. And there wasn't any Georgetown chert there, and that was just north of this. So we're really looking at the very northern extent of the Georgetown resource area. And it is a major resource. There have been several recent discoveries. The Hog-Eye cache, I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's like a cache of 52 Clovis bifaces that were found in the sand mines. Yeah, 52. And they were all made out of Georgetown, right? and and really, you know, Gault is one of the heavy, you know, the largest Clovis manufacturing sites that are known. You know, so who knows that if it didn't come from there, who can say? There's a lot of Edwards, there's a lot of Georgetown church still out there. So who's to say? Oh, good God, what got them? And then so in those, and so when I would go up into those areas, as soon as I would hit the good raw material, the artifact count would just increase exponentially. I mean, literally, I would go out there when I took Charles Koenig, who's the new hire at UT. I mean, literally, we went to some spots that are more flakes than dirt. It is just incredible. And then you go down slope where the crappy cherts are. There's you know, it's tepid utilization at best. All right, but one of the things that I did see there, it was getting targeted, right? And that some of those debris clusters that I saw had just really, compelling Clovis technological characteristics. And but the secondary cherts, as I mentioned, that are down in Valley, they're getting used to. I mean, I went down and I sampled them, and I'm seeing a lot of testing. Some of those wedge-shaped cores that I picked out, I'm pretty convinced, based on their cortex and their morphology, that they were probably made on some of that material down there. So they're definitely utilizing that secondary raw material. So, I guess, they're using both sources of raw material, and some are better for the manufacture of certain kinds of tools than other. I don't want to get too much weeds on that. And so that, exactly, so that gets into the, so you'll use a different technological approach, right, for blocky stuff. So you're going to go more core, more blade, but the flat stuff, you can just edge and make big bifaces. And so based on where you are, your reduction approach is going to change. And that's, very interesting if, you're trying to understand human behavior and land use. So as this investigation goes on, so it's really starting to give me, hopefully it'll give me a better understanding of, early Paleogene land use, not just there, but in the broader region. Defining the Georgetown resource area as kind of its own elevates. And I really do. I think, when I'm seeing Clovis caches coming off that resource area, it's significant. And other caches have come to light now from the same area out in Elgin, off on the upper coastal plain, blade caches that are made out of the same kind of Georgetown raw materials. So it clearly, a lot of stuff is coming off from early times. And you got to think about it, it's a resource, right? And so that ties into, it's economics, right? It's a resource. And so when they map all this stuff out and they move out into areas where they're going to be in resource scarcity out in the upper, coastal plain, if they're hunting, they're going to take this stuff with them. So all of this really helps us understand how they organize their technology and how they're, behaving, not just, Buttermilk Creek, but in the broader region. Okay. And so there's just way too many people to think, and more than are even listed on here, but I'm open for whatever questions that you may have on this. Yes.
Quick question. In the mid-70s, I was doing some work on sites west of there near Barnet, and we weren't really looking for lithics. We had a couple of lithics people with us, but they were talking about the size of the nodules they had that they were finding. Did you have anything major in this area or not? I mean, what was the size of the nodules?
No, I mean, and so I like where you're going with that. So if you want to make big bifaces, you gotta have big nodules, right? And the hog eye cache, I mean, those bifaces were big. And you gotta think, and it's a reductive process. So as you reduce the things down, the nodule may start this big, but that's not how big the biface is gonna be unless completely. So yeah, they would target these areas for, I mean, there's so many different ways to look at this, in terms of, I need to make, larger tools, more functional tools for the types of hunting that I'm doing, for the types of caching that I'm doing. And then the social aspect, I've got to do, I've got to teach the up and comers how to flint, right? Well, am I gonna do that out in the boonies when I've got my last, 3 blanks left? Or am I gonna go to where I've just got flint coming out of my ears? And I'm gonna take the kids there and I'm gonna teach them how to flint out there, right? But more to your point, the nodules there were all over the place. Big, they were small, but there was a lot of big stuff. And you could make, pretty much whatever you want. And but once you get off the plateau and you get into all those secondary cherts where it's all like river gravels and stuff, the size of the pieces that you're able to make with that raw material, you're constrained by size. Is that sense?
Yeah, I think the biggest one they had was a little smaller than a football. Most of them without, the ones they thought were big were about the size of a large softball.
Yeah.
That's what they thought were big. I mean, I'm not a lithics person, so it's news.
And it just depends on what you need, yes, sir. Yes.
How many acres involved in that ranch?
About 1,000.
And why the unique shape of it?
Well, it's just, it's just odd parcels being put together, as he could pick them up, and good for Mark, when some of those properties would become available, he picked them up as he could. And as a lot of the Gault Site was, the story of one of the great sites that wasn't, because it was a pay to dig site, right? And I went out there with Collins and Hester in '91 when they were still having people out for $25 a day to dig up all the arrowheads you wanted. And they got wind of what was going on out there, and they said, well, can we bring some of our flunkies from Tarl, one of the flunkies being me. And they're like, yeah, bring whoever you want, but it's $25 a head. And they're like, okay. And so I went out there with Emont Davis and Collins and Hester, Kevin Miller, bunch of, old timers. And anyway, and it was what we saw at the first time we went in, sad because it just looked like it was saturated bond. Now there had been some looting on Mark's place, but not the same as Gault, and so as far as the 3 L site's concerned, there are a lot of those deposits that are still very much intact. So we're going to do what we can. Understand. But again, unlike Gault, right? It's privately owned, right? And is not a conservancy. But the Cowbox family has very passionate interest in the history, property, kind of like the Skiles family and Eagle Nest Canyon, so bless their hearts. They're doing it. Any other questions?
Questions online?
So, we'll start with Ken's iPad. Brother Chris, excellent presentation. When are we getting out to 3 Owl Ranch with backhoe?
Soon, when it's not 100 degrees.
And then from Misty, any plans to explore other procurement areas in Texas?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, I was on, the phone today, so as part of, trying to define this Georgetown resource areas, I was talking to, some buddies of mine who were consulting geologists. They were students of Lee Nord at Baylor University, and, they do a lot of work with the Edwards. I'm saying, you guys have got to get me into some of these mines out there. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start sampling the cherts in situ, right? And we're gonna start using different chemical techniques to see, some of the, can we differentiate these cherts? Can we define, is it chemically defined? And there's a lot of argument, whether or not it is or not. Now, there's a professor by the name of Andy Spear who used a technique called laser ablation. It seemed to have some promise. We may use that. So we're gonna see, but in the meantime, yes, I'm always looking for more of the science.
I've got one more from Keith Elwell. Were you finding any hammerstones or other napping tools for quarrying? And if so, what was the material?
Hey Keith, and that is the crazy thing. Man, I'm telling you what, we did find hammerstones, and they must have just held onto those things like, you get a good hammerstone, and I know, because, for those of you that know me, I'm a plant member. You get a good hammerstone, and man, you just don't want it. And it's just an incredible tool, especially, you're in an environment of limestone, and you've got a good quartzite hammerstone, man, no way, you're not getting that. Unless it just cracks in half, and then you probably try to convert it to something else. But so, yes, I found both. We found 1 or 2 quartzite hammerstones, and we found more chert hammerstones, which was crazy. So they were actually using the chert as hammerstones, and the battering that you would see around the margins on those things, it was pretty clear what was going on. I was like, whoa, the use wear on that. So, and it's got mass, it's hard, it would work in a pinch. And so if you don't have quartzite, because they're a long way from central mineral region, Colorado River, you use what you can. So thanks, Keith.
Has anyone tried to see like the extent of this layer of chert, that how far it extends in that country, that area?
And and that's a really good point. That's one of the things I want to look at. And so one of the theories I want to test, I think it's in that upper member, right? And so where the Edwards meets the Georgetown Formation. So is that where that really high grade materials occur, and is it consistent? And across that area of that eastern escarpment, right? And if so, what's the geologic explanation? And it probably has something to do with sea level fluctuation and silica input into the system, radiolarian, sponge spicules, whatever. But don't get me to line, because it will. I won't. So are those high grade cherts occurring on a similar elevation and as part of landscape learning with some of the early colonists, right, coming in? So is that how they were figuring out where to find the good stuff? They'd hit those high points in the landscape to look for the good stuff. So,
And that's at like 970 feet, it looked like there.
yes, and so there's like a just under the 1,000 foot. By the time you got to 1,000 feet above mean sea level, you're fully in the Georgetown Formation. And that's interesting because I went out to a karst preserve that was 2 miles due south, the Conscreens Karst Preserve, and I caught just kind of the lower, members, they had no Georgetown church. No. It's like, whoa. But, water, springs, it was lovely, sites, but no Georgetown church there.
So if it's at 970 at that location, if you
Yeah,
go.
but who
if you go
knows what
west,
the
I mean,
incline
yeah,
is or how
up
that.
It would be at a different elevation if you went 50 miles west.
Well, if you go west, as you saw, that's a narrow strip. You get into non-chert bearing.
Well, except where you
Glen
have
Road.
cuts, like if you went west and you found a cut, it might be cut down through it
Maybe.
somewhere.
I'm gonna try to figure that out a little bit. What was available to the humans? Yes, sir.
So for that outcropping, where you were looking, how much of the resource had been utilized?
They picked it up.
They got all of it.
Oh, well, so I found some nodules and I saved them as examples, right? Because I wanted to see what the morphology was. Now, since, I did have the permission of the cowpox family, I won't lie to you that I did find this one nodule. I was out with my daughters that was just absolutely gigantic and I just could not help myself. And I tried to make a giant biface with it. And I ended up with two big ones. So, but by and large, and you see it, I used to go back and for those of you driven I-35 and you've seen the Texas Crushed Stone Quarry, it's this huge quarry, it's right by Interspace. Me and Kevin Miller used to go back in there in the old days. Oh, the old days, Anyway, and we would just like load up the pickup truck. They'd let you in and it was just these big flat nodules. And it's the same thing that we were seeing at Texas Crushed Stone back in the day. And except they're mining it out and they hated the chert because they didn't like it because it messed up the rock pressure. And but they needed the compressive strength of that particular dolomite, right? And we just go in there and they're like, yeah, take all the chert you want. And we bottomed out the springs in this pickup, with some of the highest grade chert, and we were terrible nappers, so we just blew through that stuff. But but there, where I told you it had been solution dissolved, they picked it. And so I'd see a few nodules here and there, and where stuff would erode out that they didn't see, right, out of the clays. I sampled it as an example of, yes, these are the kinds of morphologies and what kind of lithic reduction approach would you use for this kind of nodule, especially if it's flat, it's ovate, it's very fine grained.
Well, join me in thanking Chris for joining us. You who want to see it again? Or the refined version, just a few months away will be the GIS annual meeting. Once again held in McAllen, Texas. It's near Brownsville. And for that reason, I'll remind everyone that we are rescheduling our October meeting. September meeting is normal, but our October meeting is getting pushed back one day on a Wednesday, the 8th. But I also want to go over one more thing I might have forgotten tonight. Forgive me, Glenn. You did come all this way with these screens, so just want to share with our users online and in the room. Alan, am I quite visible on the screen? All right, folks. We have been contacted by FEMA in Arlington regarding these 2 by 2 foot screens. They're very traditional survey screens. They're a little on the large side, but everyone has their preference in terms of survey screens. These can be used for various functions. It just doesn't have to be cultural resources. Obviously for teaching tools, and things like that, with TAM coming up, they have ordered too many and would like to give many of them away. So these are free. I don't know what the surplus count is, but the number is quite large. So just for people who aren't here, this is a spot welded wire mesh or hardware cloth. So if you have a very specific preference, just know that it's a very light wood. They're not terribly heavy. So if you are interested in receiving some of these free and overstock screens from Arlington, FEMA Glenn is your contact there on the screen, glenn.lee@1955@gmail.com. With that, I'm going to close out tonight's meeting. Thank you all for joining us in person and online for our August 25 meeting at NTAS, and have a wonderful. Beautiful.